In the dry hills of Arizona, a one-legged veteran lived alone with a mustang no one could touch. People said she was just a broken woman clinging to a dying farm. But when a wealthy developer came to steal her land and left her in the dirt, humiliated, he didn't count on the one witness he couldn't silence. The wild horse she once saved was about to save her back. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. In the high desert basin outside Prescott, Arizona, summer didn't just arrive, it burned its name into the earth. The land here was sun-bleached and stubborn, a stretch of red clay, mesquite, and rocky hills that sloped into the broader granite basin. On most days, the sky felt too wide, too blue, and the wind came dry and sharp, carrying with it the scent of juniper and the faint whisper of dust devils tumbling across the valley. It was here, beneath the shadow of the old Sierra Butte Ridge, that June Callister lived alone on a worn-out patch of land no one had dared to trespass in years. June Callister was 67, tall but slightly stooped from years of stubborn labor. Her frame was wiry, the kind that came not from exercise but from survival. Her hair, once auburn, was now steel gray, cropped close to the scalp for practicality. Her face was a map of sun and time, creased, weathered, and carved with the kind of quiet suffering she never talked about. Her left leg ended just above the knee. In its place was a titanium prosthetic, military-issued, weather-worn, and as much a part of her identity as the scars she bore on her back. She had lost the leg 12 years ago during a deployment in Kandahar, when an IED turned an ordinary patrol into a moment that rewrote her life. June didn't speak much anymore, not unless she had to. Solitude had settled on her shoulders like an old friend, one she didn't mind sharing coffee with at dawn. Her daughter, Clara, had been her last real tether to the outside world. But Clara had passed 5 years ago in a highway crash that came without warning and stole the breath from June's lungs for months. Since then, it had been just her. And Whisper. Whisper was not a horse for beginners. Even after 10 years on the ranch, the white Mustang never wore a saddle, never came when called unless he felt like it. He was a proud, broad-shouldered stallion with a pale coat that shimmered like bone under the Arizona sun, and a dark gray mane that whipped across his flank when the wind picked up. He had arrived during a sandstorm, bleeding and half-mad with fear, his right hind leg gashed open, likely from old barbed wire or a failed escape attempt. Most would have put a bullet in him. June had offered water. Whisper had responded not with trust, but with silence. It took months for him to even allow her near him. Now, he circled her home like a ghostly sentinel, pacing the edges of the property with the instincts of a creature who had chosen not to be tamed, but to be loyal. June lived in a low-slung house built by her grandfather, a structure of stone and timber that had outlasted the great fires, the flood seasons, and the biting winters. Its tin roof shimmered like dull silver under the sun, catching every ray of light as if daring the sky to scorch it. The place was surrounded by fencing she repaired by hand, one post at a time, usually with Whisper watching from a cautious distance. She grew collards, tomatoes, onions, and cilantro in neat rows behind the kitchen window, each bed lined with upturned bottles to keep the rodents out. There were no tractors here, no irrigation systems, just buckets, elbow grease, and muscle memory. Each morning she strapped on the prosthetic and tightened the latch, grimacing at the pressure it put on her stump. She didn't complain. Pain had long ago become just another rhythm of the day. With her hands, she weeded the garden, checked traps, replaced fence wire, and at dusk, she sat on the porch with a chipped mug of chicory coffee, watching Whisper make his slow rounds beneath the orange fire of the setting sun. She carried a whip, not for cruelty, but for memory. It had been given to her by Sergeant Harlow back in her cavalry training days before Kandahar, before the shrapnel. The leather had darkened over time, oiled and worn smooth by her palm. She used it sometimes to scare off coyotes, sometimes to guide Whisper when he lingered too close to the garden rows, but mostly it hung at her hip like a relic, a reminder of who she had been and who she still could be if ever tested. Few people came out this way. Delivery trucks stopped at the mailbox 3 miles up the road. The nearest neighbor, old Nate Crowley, lived 6 miles east and hadn't knocked on her door in over 2 years. That suited June fine. She wasn't one for pity, and the townsfolk of Prescott, those who remembered her marching in uniform at Veterans Day parades, knew better than to offer charity. She hadn't attended a town meeting since Clara's funeral. It was a Wednesday when she first heard the distant snort of trouble. She was bent over a patch of wilting spinach, adjusting the hose pressure from the rusted spigot, when Whisper gave a long, low whinny from the western fence line. His ears were flat, his body tense. June turned her head slowly, squinting into the shimmering air. But there was nothing there. Not yet. Whisper stood still for several minutes, head turned toward the dirt road that curved up through the arroyo. June didn't ask what he saw. She had learned to trust the horse's senses more than her own. If he felt something approaching, something was coming. She wiped the sweat from her brow, picked up her whip, and adjusted the tightness on her prosthetic. The sun had risen high, baking the clay beneath her boots. Another day in the high desert, another evening on the porch. And perhaps if Whisper's tension meant anything, the beginning of something she wasn't ready for. The next morning arrived on the tail end of a red-orange dawn, spilling sunlight over the hills like liquid copper. The heat came early, rising off the soil in waves that shimmered as they danced above the cracked clay. June Callister stood at the edge of her collared patch, hands on her hips, frowning at a suspicious line of tire tracks that hadn't been there the day before. They carved through the dust like claws, broad, deep, far too clean to be local. She clicked her tongue once. From the distance, a faint snort answered. Whisper stood beneath the lone cottonwood tree near the western fence line, his white coat already dusted with golden morning light. His head was raised, ears pointed sharply south, eyes locked on the road below. June didn't need to see the vehicle to know it was coming. Whisper had gone stiff, legs planted, tail swishing with irritation. She took a breath, wiped her forehead with the back of her glove, and walked toward the porch. Her whip was already looped at her hip, an instinct more than preparation. 15 minutes later, the low hum of an engine echoed up the canyon. The vehicle appeared through a cloud of dust, sleek black and far too polished to belong out here. A Cadillac Escalade, matte finished with mirrored windows, pulled to a stop with an entitled crunch of gravel right near the faded fence line. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Grayson McAllister stepped out, the kind of man who carried power like a scent. He was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, his skin tanned unnaturally smooth, likely from sunless booths and private spas. His sandy brown hair was slicked back with precision, not a strand out of place. And he wore a navy suit that looked better suited to a boardroom than a ranch. His Italian loafers crunched the gravel with annoyance. Grayson's expression was confident, even pleasant at first, until he looked around and visibly winced at the state of the property. His eyes flicked from the dusty crops to the chipped paint on the house's wooden siding. He smiled, but it was thin, calculated. "Mrs. Callister," he said, voice warm like syrup but with an aftertaste of vinegar. "You must be the woman I've heard so much about." June didn't respond. She simply stood at the edge of the porch, one boot up on the rail, arms folded over her chest. "I represent Sunrise Holdings," he continued. "We've been acquiring properties all across the valley. Development is moving fast. Eco-resorts, sustainable vineyards, spa retreats. Your land sits on a prime ridge with direct access to Granite Basin trailheads. You're sitting on the future of Prescott's luxury market." June's face remained unreadable. She'd dealt with men like him before, young officers with polished boots and nothing behind their eyes but ambition. "Not for sale," she replied simply. Grayson laughed, a well-practiced chuckle meant to disarm. "I haven't even made the offer yet." "You don't need to," she said. "The answer's the same." He stepped closer, pausing at the bottom of the porch. His smile cracked slightly. "Listen, I get it. History, legacy, all that sentimental grit. But look around you. This place is falling apart. You're out here alone, struggling to grow lettuce in desert clay. And what? Your only company is that ghost of a horse?" He gestured vaguely toward the pasture. June's gaze flicked to Whisper, who stood 100 yards off but had inched forward, watching. The stallion's muscles rippled as he shifted his weight. His ears were flattened now. Grayson mistook her silence for indecision. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a manila envelope. "Inside is an offer 3 times market value. You can take it?" Move anywhere you want. Get out of this heat, this loneliness. There's no one left here for you. June's jaw tightened, but her voice was calm. You came all this way to be told no. Now you've been told. Get off my land. Grayson's smile vanished. You're making a mistake. No, she replied, stepping off the porch. You're making a habit of underestimating people. Grayson's face twisted. His tone dropped the charm like a snake shedding skin. You think a bitter old cripple is going to stop progress? June narrowed her eyes. Careful what you say next, boy. But Grayson was already moving. In a flash of frustration, he lunged forward and shoved her hard in the shoulder. Caught off guard, June stumbled back. Her prosthetic leg buckled beneath her and gave out with a metallic click. She hit the ground hard, the impact sending a spike of pain up her spine. Her leg detached at the socket and skidded across the dirt. Grayson's mouth curled in a sneer. He glanced down at her. Now that's about what I expected, he muttered, spitting into the dirt beside her. He turned and marched back toward the escalade. Behind him, Whisper let out a shrill, furious whinny. The horse reared, hooves flailing at the sky. Grayson flinched slightly but didn't turn around. He stepped into the SUV, slammed the door, and peeled away in a storm of dust. June gritted her teeth and dragged herself across the dirt with her elbows until she reached the prosthetic. Her breathing was labored and the grit stung in her palms, but her hands moved without hesitation. Click, twist, lock. She stood slowly, dusted herself off, and turned to face the field. Whisper stood near the fence now, snorting heavily, pawing at the earth as if to tear into it. His mane was wild in the wind, his body still trembling with fury. June whispered, "It's all right, boy," though nothing was all right. She picked up her whip from the porch where it had fallen and gripped it tighter than she needed to. "Let him come back," she muttered, voice low. "Next time we're not being polite." The moon had risen high by the time the sound of tires crunched along the gravel road leading up to the Callister Ranch. It was nearly midnight, and the Arizona sky stretched out in a deep indigo dome, freckled with stars. The wind had stilled for once, letting the heat of the day cling to the earth. Inside the dim farmhouse, June sat at the kitchen table, a chipped ceramic mug of lukewarm tea cradled in her weathered hands. Her whip lay coiled on the bench beside her, a silent reminder of that day's violence. She hadn't told anyone, not the sheriff, not the Veterans Affairs contact, not even Nate Crowley down the road, but someone knew. And that someone was coming. The sound of an engine, lighter than Grayson's SUV, hummed closer until headlights flickered across the porch. June stood slowly, her knees stiff from the fall, and limped to the door. She didn't recognize the vehicle, a dusty green Jeep Wrangler with oversized tires, but the silhouette that stepped out was unmistakable. Sadie Callister. She had grown. Now 19, Sadie stood just a few inches shy of June's height. She was all sinew and strength, with thick, dark eyebrows over sharp green eyes that never seemed to look away when others blinked. Her hair was tied back in a high ponytail, streaked with desert blonde from too much sun. She wore cargo pants stained with dirt and a wrinkled university hoodie that read, UNR Environmental Sciences. A canvas backpack sagged from one shoulder, its patches fraying at the corners. June opened the door before Sadie had the chance to knock. The girl blinked, then charged forward, wrapping her arms tightly around her grandmother. The embrace was fierce, raw, urgent. "I saw the footage," Sadie muttered, her voice shaking with fury. "Someone posted it on a local veterans bot forum. Grayson, that bastard kicked your leg off." June said nothing at first. She placed a hand gently on the girl's back, guiding her inside. "You drove from Reno in the middle of the night?" Sadie dropped her pack beside the door. 6 hours. I left as soon as I saw it." "You should have called." "You wouldn't have answered." That was probably true. They sat at the table in silence for a moment. June reached for another mug and poured Sadie some of the bitter tea. "Pa," the girl grimaced after one sip and pushed it aside. "We need to report him." "No." "June," I said no. The tone was flat. Final. "You think Prescott's gonna march on a real estate king with one phone call from an old woman with a fake leg? He's got lawyers in his pocket and half the zoning board on his payroll. You call the cops, you light a fire, and we're the ones standing in the field with the matches." Sadie's jaw tensed. "Then what? You let him come back and finish what he started?" June glanced out the window, where the moon cast long silver shadows across the pasture. "No," she said softly. "I just know how these fights play out. He's not expecting trouble. Next time he'll find it." Sadie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we'll be ready." Outside, the faint sound of hooves scraped against packed dirt. Both women looked up. Whisper had come to a halt just beyond the fence near the garden. The white Mustang stood like a sentinel in the moonlight, his muscles coiled beneath his coat. He stomped once, the echo sharp in the still night. "Does he always do that?" Sadie asked. June nodded. "Every morning and evening. Fence patrol. He's been doing it since the storm last summer." Sadie rose quietly and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath her weight. Whisper turned his head toward her, ears forward. For a moment she hesitated at the railing. Then she descended the steps slowly, holding her hand out low, palm down, just as her grandmother had taught her years ago. Whisper didn't flinch. He approached her slowly, lowering his head. His breath was warm against her skin. Sadie smiled, her eyes glassy. "He remembers me." "Whisper doesn't forget," June said from the doorway, "especially not the ones who belong here." Sadie stroked the horse's nose gently. "This place shouldn't be sold. It's not just dirt, it's family." June didn't answer right away. She leaned against the doorframe, watching her granddaughter and the Mustang. The girl who used to run barefoot through these fields now stood taller, more serious. There was a quiet strength in her, the kind forged by grief and purpose. Sadie had lost her mother, Clara, far too young. The accident had splintered her, sending her first into silence, then into a frenzy of academic ambition. She had buried herself in science, fieldwork, climate data, as if studying the land could somehow anchor her to the part of her life that had vanished. Now that same grief had brought her back. That night, the two women stayed up late. June shared what she knew about Grayson, the company, the offers, the threat. Sadie shared news from school, field experiments, friends she hadn't told June about. They laughed once. A real laugh. It felt foreign. At dawn, Sadie was already awake, standing at the northern fence with her notebook, tracking the property lines, sketching in quick, confident strokes. "I want to know where our weaknesses are," she said when June brought her coffee. "If he comes back, we'll know where he might try to enter." Smart. Years of field mapping. Guess they paid off. Whisper approached again that morning, slower this time. Sadie greeted him like an old friend. The Mustang pressed his muzzle gently against her shoulder as if to say, "Welcome back." The sun had barely crested the jagged silhouette of the Bradshaw Mountains when June noticed something was off. The morning air, though already dry and warm, carried an unnatural silence. The usual soft gurgle of the stream that ran along the property's east edge was missing, a sound she had taken for granted for decades. June stood at the edge of the spinach rows, tilting her head toward the creek. Not a whisper. Her brow furrowed as she walked across the brittle grass, her gait deliberate as she adjusted her prosthetic knee brace. Sadie trailed behind, her camera slung around her neck, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I think the stream's gone dry," June said flatly. Sadie blinked. "But it rained 2 weeks ago. It shouldn't just disappear overnight." The two followed the dirt path toward the narrow trench that cut through the ranch like a faded ribbon. The earth was cracked and dry, save for a few puddles that clung to the low points. June crouched at the pipe junction just off the vegetable rows and twisted the main valve. Nothing came but a hollow spit of air. Sadie knelt beside her, her fingers brushing the sediment around the inlet. No debris, no animal blockages. This was cut off upstream. Without another word, they packed a canteen, binoculars, and Sadie's camera, then mounted the ATV and set off upstream, tracing the dry bed into the folds of the canyon. The land grew narrower and more tangled the farther they traveled, flanked by juniper and catclaw trees. The higher they climbed, the cooler the air became, but there was still no sign of flowing water. An hour into the ride, Whisper appeared. The Mustang had followed at a steady distance, weaving through the underbrush with quiet grace. His coat, already streaked with dust, shimmered white where the light touched it. June glanced back, half smiling. "We've got company." Sadie didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed ahead. At the crest of a ridge shaded by granite outcroppings, they found it. A makeshift dam wedged across the stream's throat. Sandbags, plastic tubing, and planks of lumber had been stacked in an ugly wall, choking the water's natural course. Behind it, a stagnant pool had begun to collect, swirling sluggishly in the heat. Sadie's face darkened. She stepped forward, snapping several photographs in quick succession. Then she pointed to a plastic board nailed to a support beam, where a faded logo was spray-painted in orange. Sunrise Holdings. A surge of fury burned through her. They're stealing our water. They built a damn reservoir to hoard it. June stood still for a long moment, jaw tight. He's not just trying to buy us out. He's trying to starve us off the land. Sadie circled the dam, careful not to slip on the uneven rocks. She found another sign, a length of black tubing leading downhill to a freshly dug trench. It fed directly into a massive cylindrical water tank, camouflaged with desert brush and set just out of sight. "That's theft," Sadie muttered, raising her lens again. "This isn't zoning. This is a damn heist." The moment was shattered by the distant hum of an engine. June's shoulders stiffened. Whisper's ears shot forward and then pinned back. The noise grew louder, the grind of tires chewing up dry earth. Then came the glint of sunlight on polished metal, 3 black trucks ascending the hill from the opposite slope. They pulled up in a staggered line, kicking dust into the air. Out stepped Grayson McAllister, his sleeves rolled up over muscled forearms, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his face. He wore the same smug grin, the same gleam of indifference in his eyes. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 workers in jeans and neon vests trailed behind him, carrying equipment: pumps, hoses, toolkits. One was a wiry man with a clipboard. The other, broad and silent, lifted the heavy gear without complaint. Neither looked up at June or Sadie. Grayson looked around and feigned surprise. "Well, look who found the garden hose." "You've crossed the line," June said, her voice steely. "This land has water rights dating back 40 years. Grayson smirked. "And the valley has development rights from 3 weeks ago. We're just diverting resources temporarily. Maximizing flow efficiency." "You mean stealing?" "I mean progress. You're choking on sentiment, June. Time to wake up." Sadie stepped forward, raising her camera. "I've already documented this. I'll file a report with the Department of Water Resources." Grayson's smile widened. "Oh, sweetheart, by the time your paperwork trickles through the system, that tank will be drained, paved over, and forgotten. And while you're wasting breath, the price on this land will keep dropping. So go ahead, shoot your little pictures." He turned and motioned to his workers. "Start the pumps." Engines roared to life. Water began to slurp through the pipes with an ugly churn. Suddenly, Whisper charged forward. In 3 powerful strides, he placed himself squarely between the dam and the trucks, tail high, hooves digging into the earth. His breath came hot and loud, eyes locked on Grayson. A low, angry snort burst from his nostrils. Grayson paused, but didn't flinch. "That's a nice trick. Still playing cowboy, huh?" Whisper didn't move. His front hoof stamped once, twice. June stepped forward and placed a hand on Sadie's shoulder. "Let him see we're not afraid." Grayson chuckled, tapping his watch. "You've got 30 seconds before I call animal control. Last I checked, mustangs weren't licensed security." Then, without warning, Whisper reared. The noise was deafening. His hooves slashed the air, and the ground shook beneath him. The workers backed away, startled. Grayson took 1 step back, the grin slipping. June held her ground. "Next time you show up uninvited, you won't be walking away without a fight." Grayson's face hardened. He waved his hand. "Let's pack it up. We'll be back with paperwork." Sadie kept clicking photos, capturing every motion, every angle. Grayson noticed. "Better hope that camera doesn't get lost in a freak accident." Sadie didn't blink. "You better hope it doesn't get published in a statewide newspaper." As the trucks pulled away, Whisper remained motionless. His eyes tracked the SUV until it disappeared into the low hills, and only then did he lower his head. Sadie walked over and pressed her palm to his forehead. "He knows what's at stake," she whispered. "Yes," June replied, "and so do we." The desert sky had turned a bruised purple by late afternoon, the kind of color that whispered of trouble long before the first gust of wind. Thunder rolled low across Granite Basin, echoing through the canyons like distant artillery. June Callister stood on the porch, eyes narrowed at the shifting cloud banks crawling over the mountains. Her prosthetic leg ached in the socket, a pain she had long learned to trust as nature's barometer. Inside the ranch house, Sadie spread out a laminated topographical map across the kitchen table, the edges curling under a stack of water-stained geology reports. She had spent the last 2 hours analyzing runoff paths, calculating how much water the temporary dam upstream could hold before it burst. Now her eyes darted between the map and the storm radar glowing on her laptop screen. "If we get 2 inches of rain in less than an hour, that dam's toast," she said, voice tight. "And when it goes, it'll slam through the canyon, sweep past the foothills, and drown half the valley." June didn't flinch. "Then we need to weaken it before it breaks on its own. Slow the release, dig channels to divert the flow. Whisper can help find the weak points. He's already seen where the pressure builds." Sadie nodded, biting the edge of her thumb, a habit from childhood that returned only in moments of deep worry. They packed quickly. Rope, spades, flashlights, Sadie's camera and notebook, and June's coiled leather whip, the same one she'd carried since her days in mounted infantry. Whisper stood waiting at the edge of the yard, his white coat shimmering under the first drops of rain. His body twitched with unease, ears swiveling like twin radar dishes. They reached the dam an hour later, the wind now howling through the ravine like a beast uncaged. The water behind the barricade had swelled, slapping against the sandbags with desperate insistence. Whisper circled the dam once, then returned to June, pawing at the ground and snorting. "He's found it," June said. "That center seam's starting to give." As they approached, the roar of engines shattered the wind. 3 black SUVs surged into the clearing, tires slipping on the wet rocks. Doors flew open. Grayson McAllister stepped out first, dressed in a black rain slicker with a holstered pistol at his hip. He looked less polished than usual, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes bloodshot from frustration. At his side walked 2 men. Tall, heavy-set enforcers in tactical boots and dark jackets. One cradled a shotgun. Grayson's smile was feral. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" June raised her chin. "If that dam bursts, you won't be building a resort. You'll be facing a class action lawsuit from every rancher in the basin. Then I'll take care of the problem right now." He nodded toward Whisper. "Move the horse or I'll put him down." Sadie stepped forward, shaking, her camera dangling useless at her side. "You're threatening to shoot a horse during a storm in front of witnesses?" "No witnesses," Grayson snapped, drawing his gun. "Only mud, rain, and 2 trespassers who got in over their heads." Whisper reared, hooves flashing in the stormlight, his scream sharp and guttural. Grayson flinched but aimed steadily. Then June moved. In one fluid, practiced motion, she snapped her whip forward. The leather curled midair and lashed around Grayson's wrist with a sickening crack. The gun fired, a wild shot that disappeared into the sky. Grayson cursed and staggered back as the weapon clattered into the mud. "Drop it!" June barked at the nearest guard. The man hesitated, then raised his hands. The second dropped the shotgun. Before anyone could react further, Whisper lunged. He charged the dam with terrifying precision, his hooves landing on the exact weak seam he'd discovered earlier. Sandbags burst apart under the pressure. Water exploded through the opening, ripping through wood and plastic like paper. Sadie cried out and ran to the right flank, digging a trench as fast as her hands could move. June joined her, carving an angled channel with her spade. The water gushed through their cuts and spilled into the lower basin, rushing down a natural gully and away from the ranches below. Behind them, the downpour turned heavy, drowning the sounds of panic. The guards scrambled to higher ground. Grayson slipped and fell face first in the mud, his coat flapping like a useless cape. Whisper stood atop the wreckage of the dam, soaked but unshaken, his mane plastered against his neck, eyes burning with triumph. The gunshot had not gone unnoticed. From the valley below, a chorus of headlights flickered through the trees. Trucks bounced over the ridge, headlights stabbing the darkness. Joe Miller arrived first, a lanky man in his 50s with a permanent farmer's tan and a ball cap that read "Save the Basin." His teenage son, Thomas, jumped down with a coil of rope. Behind them came Helen Ibarra, a schoolteacher turned beekeeper, steering her battered Jeep with grim purpose. Travis Boone's pickup trailed last, packed with burlap sacks and makeshift tools. Joe shouted, "We heard a shot. You all right?" Sadie waved frantically. "Help us trench the sides. The water needs guidance, or it'll spread wild." Without hesitation, the townsfolk surged into action. Helen and Thomas dug along the southern edge, while Joe and Travis worked their way east. Within minutes, the group had shaped a new outlet for the flow, redirecting water back into the creek's original path. Grayson struggled to rise, mud in his eyes and on his teeth. When he finally stood, June faced him, whip still in hand. "You point a gun at my horse again, and you'll leave here missing more than your pride." Grayson looked past her to the crowd, neighbors filming on phones, water rushing behind him, Whisper glaring like a creature summoned from storm and myth. He said nothing, just turned and limped to his SUV. The storm had passed, leaving the granite basin air thick with petrichor and the scent of churned earth. The morning after was muted but not silent. Birds cautiously returned to sing, and the land seemed to breathe again. June Callister stood on her porch, boots still caked with last night's mud, watching Whisper pace the eastern fence line with a soldier's discipline. The Mustang had not rested long after the chaos at the dam. He walked now with the same quiet vigilance as June herself had once patrolled foreign outposts. Though drenched, exhausted, and sore, he hadn't missed a beat. He was no longer just a horse. He was a symbol. The whole town seemed to agree. That sentiment gained traction quickly, faster than June or Sadie anticipated. Sadie, in her flannel shirt and jeans streaked with dried clay, was no longer just a student. She had become a catalyst. That very morning, seated at the kitchen table with her battered laptop and a thermos of black coffee, she launched a Facebook group titled Basin Watch. Its mission: to unite the ranchers, families, and shopkeepers of the valley in opposition to Sunrise Holdings. She posted drone footage from the dam, photos of the damage, stills of Whisper standing atop the broken barricade, and a clipped video of June cracking the whip to disarm Grayson. Within hours, the page had over 1,000 members. Sadie also posted short updates on water levels, land rights, and environmental impact reports she had collected over her college semesters. With surprising savvy, she designed infographics and calls to action, encouraging locals to share footage, alert one another to suspicious activity, and prepare for a formal environmental lawsuit. The response was overwhelming. Comments poured in. Messages of support arrived from neighboring counties. A beekeeper named Tanya offered to fly her drone over Sunrise Holdings trucks. A former park ranger volunteered legal guidance. From town, Connor Bell's mother messaged Sadie privately. Connor, her 8-year-old son with autism, had seen the video of Whisper and hadn't stopped talking about the white lightning horse ever since. Normally withdrawn, Connor was now asking if he could meet the horse in person. After a short exchange, June agreed, cautiously. Connor arrived the next day, clutching a faded red backpack in his mother's hand. He had sandy hair that curled slightly at the edges, deep-set blue eyes, and a nervous gait that suggested he wasn't used to being outdoors. His mother, Dana Bell, a petite woman with freckled arms and a calm voice, knelt beside him, whispering encouragement. Whisper stood still in the corral, head raised slightly, ears alert. As Connor approached, his breath quickened. He stopped 10 feet away and looked to June for guidance. June nodded once. "Take your time, son." Slowly, Connor stepped forward. Whisper didn't move, only flicked his ears and waited. Then, with careful hesitation, Connor reached out. His fingers brushed the Mustang's nose. A moment passed, long and sacred, before Connor leaned in and gently pressed his forehead to the horse's muzzle. Dana gasped softly. "He's never done that with anyone, not even our dog." June didn't answer. She was too busy watching a miracle unfold. Later that evening, Sadie posted a photo of Connor and Whisper on the Basin Watch page. The image went viral in local circles. It was picked up by a small news outlet out of Prescott, whose editor, a grizzled man named Vince Holloway, had a soft spot for redemption stories. Vince ran the piece under the headline, "The Mustang Who Saved the Valley." The story recounted the confrontation at the dam, the horse's role in defusing the flood, and the growing defiance against Sunrise Holdings. Vince even included an excerpt from his interview with June, who'd reluctantly allowed him to visit the ranch. "I didn't tame Whisper," the article quoted her. "He chose to stay. Maybe because he saw something in this land worth protecting." The article landed like wildfire. Within a week, regional TV stations were calling. Conservation groups expressed interest in helping fund litigation. Sunrise Holdings' name, once hidden behind brochures of luxury cabins and eco-retreats, became linked with water theft, illegal dams, and threats to endangered wildlife habitats. But the fight wasn't over. That night, while June polished her saddle in the barn under a single dim bulb, Sadie sat outside with Whisper beneath a bright half-moon. She fed him thin slices of apple and rubbed his shoulder, tracing the faint scars along his flank. "We've started something," she whispered. "But they're not going to back down without a fight." In response, Whisper stamped once and turned his head north, the way he always did when sensing something foreign, something wrong. Sadie followed his gaze. There, barely visible beyond the ridge, headlights blinked once, then disappeared. She stood quickly and turned toward the house. "Gran," June was already at the door, rifle in hand, not to shoot, just to watch. She hadn't let her guard down since Grayson's visit. Whisper walked to the fence, stood tall, then began patrolling again, this time along the newly added eastern perimeter. Whisper's route had changed. He now made 2 full rounds each night. Sadie had charted it with a cheap GPS tracker clipped beneath his halter. Each lap took him past the barn, along the east and north fence lines, through the dry wash, and back past the broken well, where he'd stop and listen. The data showed his rhythm was exact, always within a 2-minute range. Sadie uploaded that information to Basin Watch with the caption, "This is our security system, powered by hay and loyalty." The community adored it. They began calling Whisper the Sentinel. June didn't say much about it, but every evening before the horse began his rounds, she'd press a hand to his neck and whisper a few words no one else could hear. The morning sun over Granite Basin broke gently through a gauze of thin desert clouds. June Callister leaned against the corral rail, her hand resting lightly on Whisper's shoulder as she watched him finish his final lap. The breeze carried the faintest scent of mesquite and iron-rich earth. The past week had been a blur. Community meetings, interviews, drone footage reviews, but this morning brought a different kind of news. June held a crisp white envelope in her other hand. Inside was a letter on thick ivory paper, sealed with the emblem of the Grand Desert Equine Showcase, Arizona's most prestigious horse exhibition. The letter was from Dr. Marshall Langford, a behavioral specialist with a national reputation in equine studies. He'd seen the Basin Watch footage of Whisper and had tracked June down with a single purpose, an invitation. Dr. Langford arrived that same afternoon. He stepped out of a tan Jeep with dust streaks across its doors and wore a simple button-up, slacks, and a well-worn cowboy hat. In his early 60s, Langford had a lean, wiry frame with sun-creased skin and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. His handshake was firm, and his voice carried a soft southern cadence, thoughtful and measured. "I've watched that Mustang walk a child out of panic," he told June while leaning on the gate. "That's not training, that's empathy, and we need people to see that." June hesitated. "We don't do shows." Langford nodded. "It's not just for ribbons. This year, the showcase is raising funds for a statewide therapy center for children. Autism, PTSD, you name it. If Whisper goes, he's not just a symbol for this ranch. He could be a spark for something bigger." It was Sadie who eventually convinced June. "You always said this land's worth protecting because of its truth," she said. "Maybe it's time people saw the truth that lives on it." 2 weeks later, June found herself standing under the bright, blinding lights of the Prescott Grand Arena. The event grounds were massive, rows of trailers, tents, and perfectly groomed horses. Breed signs fluttered in the warm breeze. Arabians, quarter horses, paints. Riders in embroidered jackets passed by, brushing the dust from polished saddles. Loudspeakers crackled with announcements over music. Children ran between booths selling feed supplements and custom tack. Whisper didn't flinch at any of it. He walked with a purposeful calm, head high, mane catching the light, coat brushed to a gentle sheen. His old barbed wire scar was still visible on his left flank. Langford insisted it not be covered. "That's part of who he is," he said. The competition was divided into segments: basic handling, obstacle navigation, social interaction, and emotional intelligence. Whisper passed through the first 2 smoothly. June, dressed in her pressed ranch shirt, jeans, and leather gloves, gave no verbal commands. She used gestures, body posture, and the occasional soft whistle. Whisper responded with a fluidity that silenced entire sections of the crowd. but it was the emotional interaction portion that made history. The showcase's final event was held in the central arena beneath a high canvas canopy. Spectators filled the stands, locals, tourists, students, and professionals. The judges included Langford and 2 regional equine specialists. At center ring was a circle of 10 children, each selected from the local therapy program. They stood nervously, some shifting side to side, others clutching small tokens or stuffed animals. Among them stood Connor Bell, dressed in a checkered shirt, jeans, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. Connor looked terrified. His eyes darted from the crowd to the loudspeakers to the massive open space. June saw it before anyone else. His shoulders stiffened, his breaths shortened. Dana, his mother, was in the front row, white-knuckled on her seat edge. Then, without prompting, Whisper began to move. June hadn't signaled. She stood still, hands at her sides. But the Mustang stepped forward into the arena. His hooves made no sound on the padded sand. He walked slowly, carefully, weaving past the other children without bumping or startling them. Then he stopped directly in front of Connor. The boy didn't look up at first. Whisper lowered his head. One long breath passed. Then Connor lifted his eyes, wide and glassy. His hand moved forward like a tremor. Whisper didn't flinch. The boy's fingers pressed into the horse's soft muzzle. Gasps swept through the crowd. Not from the children, from the adults. Connor took another step forward and placed both hands on Whisper's face. Then he did something no one expected. He leaned in and hugged him. Tears rolled down Dana Bell's face. Even June blinked rapidly. The arena was silent. The announcer, whose microphone was live, said only one word: remarkable. Later that afternoon, the judges reconvened. Though no traditional points system accounted for emotional connection, Langford stood and made a formal motion. For the first time in the event's history, they created a new accolade: Equine Emotional Intelligence Honor. Whisper became the first recipient. June didn't care about trophies. But as she stood beside Whisper for the press photos, watching Connor beam and wave at him from the sidelines, she felt something settle in her chest. Not pride. Closure. As flashbulbs popped and microphones reached toward her, a reporter asked, "Is this redemption for everything you've faced with Sunrise Holdings?" June looked at Whisper, who was now nuzzling the side of a young volunteer's head, calm as dusk. "I don't know if redemption's the word," she said quietly, "but I know this horse helped me stand again, when no one else could." The sun hung low over Granite Basin, gilding the rugged hills in amber and rust. A thin veil of breeze carried the scent of sage and soil, blending with the distant rhythm of horse hooves pacing along the ridge. June Callister stood on her porch, boots planted, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as she watched an unfamiliar truck roll up the dirt drive. It wasn't black, nor armored, just a dusty, dented Ford pickup, the kind a rancher might use. From the driver's side stepped a man she hadn't seen in months, Grayson McAllister. Gone was the expensive suit and polished smirk. He wore a faded denim shirt tucked into fraying jeans, and his once oiled hair now hung loosely over his forehead. His face was thinner, cheeks sunken slightly, his gait slower. Still tall, but deflated. The man who had once tried to steal her land now looked like he barely belonged on his own. Sadie, who had been sorting seed trays near the greenhouse, looked up, tensed. "Should I get Whisper?" she asked. June shook her head. "Let's hear what the dead man walking has to say." Grayson raised a hand slowly, as if waving a white flag. No tricks, no lawyers, just a conversation. June said nothing, only gestured to the porch chair opposite hers. Grayson sat stiffly, glancing out over the now flourishing fields of Artemisia sonora. The wild herb Sadie's research had proven both rare and medicinally potent. The green leaves shimmered under the dying light like silver flames. "I lost everything," Grayson said, his voice flat. "Investors backed out. The water diversion stunt blew up in the news. State's investigating. Fines I'll never pay off. Company's gone." June sipped from her tin cup. "And now you want sympathy?" "No," he replied. "I want redemption." He unfolded a rough sketch from his pocket, blueprints of a modest facility nestled along the northern edge of the basin. A research and therapy center, focused on Artemisia sonora, sustainable farming, animal therapy, veterans and kids. "I want to help build it." June scoffed. "You want to slap your name on something decent so people forget the hell you caused?" Grayson didn't deny it. "That too. But I know you and Sadie are already building something real." I can help with logistics, funding, connections, not as a boss, as a contributor. Silent if you want." A long pause settled. Then from behind the corral fence, a sharp neigh broke the air. Whisper stood motionless, gaze fixed on the man, and beside him stood Luna, a soft-eyed bay mare with a distinctive white blaze down her snout. At her hooves, a tiny foal wobbled into view, still young, pale gray with darker legs and the faintest outline of a dorsal stripe. His name, given only days before, was Dusty Ember. Connor Bell stood nearby, the young autistic boy now a regular fixture at the ranch. He was smaller than the average 9-year-old, with sandy hair and a quiet, contemplative presence. His eyes lit up whenever he was near the foal. Dusty nuzzled his shoulder, and Connor whispered to him in murmurs only the horse seemed to understand. June's eyes flicked from Connor to Whisper to the rolling basin, now populated with workers and neighbors planting new rows of herbs and installing irrigation lines. Sadie emerged from the greenhouse, holding a thick folder, labeled Basin Cooperative Charter. She handed it to Grayson without a word. "We've already started, but if you want in, on our terms, you'll sign this. No controlling stake. You're just a name on a long list of hands helping us grow something better." Grayson leafed through it, eyes wide. "You drafted all this?" Sadie shrugged. "You built empires. I built a future." That week, the people of Granite Basin gathered beneath the community barn, now refurbished and fitted with solar panels. Helen, the town librarian, took the floor first. She spoke of how her property line had been violated, but she believed in forgiveness. Joe, the goat farmer, offered to donate his pasture land for expansion. Travis, the gruff ex-miner, committed to building proper fencing and road access. A vote was called. Unanimous. The Granite Basin Biocooperative was born. The research center broke ground in early spring. It housed labs for Artemisia sonora extraction and therapy rooms for children with special needs and veterans with PTSD. June insisted the architecture remain natural: stone, wood, earth-toned roofs. No sterile hospital atmosphere. Whisper and Luna roamed freely nearby, Dusty always a few paces behind. Dr. Marshall Langford returned to help structure the equine therapy program. He introduced June to Rebecca Chase, a licensed therapist in her early 40s with copper-red curls and laugh lines that made her eyes crinkle. She was kind, direct, and deeply intuitive, especially with children. She became the first to formally study Dusty Ember's behavior. "He's inherited more than his father's color," she once told June. "There's something in him that watches people, measures them." Connor became Dusty's best friend. He visited every Wednesday, rain or shine, riding on the foal's back as he grew steadier, stronger. The boy's speech improved and so did his confidence. One afternoon, he asked June if Dusty could be his horse. June smiled. "He already is." On the anniversary of the flood, Sadie published a long-form article titled "When the Highlands Rose." It chronicled the rise of Granite Basin from the brink of exploitation to a beacon of cooperation. The piece was picked up by several eco-agriculture journals and reprinted by a regional veterans magazine. It ended with a photo of June, Whisper, Sadie, and Dusty standing in the early morning mist. 4 generations. 2 human, 2 equine. As spring gave way to summer, June walked the fields with a noticeable ease in her step. She still wore her titanium leg, still carried her old leather whip, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of history. She had not forgotten the humiliation, the fight, or the solitude. But now her days were filled with purpose. Children's laughter echoed off the hills. Volunteers tended crops and painted barns. Whisper still did his patrols, and Dusty followed, mimicking every move. June would sometimes pause and look over the land, her parents' land, her daughter's land, now Sadie's and Connor's. The wind would shift, and she'd whisper to no one in particular, "This is how you build a legacy." Life has a way of placing us in storms, not just the kind that flood the land, but the ones that flood the soul. In this story, it wasn't power or wealth that triumphed. It was a one-legged veteran, a wild mustang, a girl with fire in her heart, and a boy who found his voice through the quiet strength of a horse. Maybe, just maybe, that's not coincidence. Maybe it's a reminder that miracles don't always arrive with thunder. They often walk in quietly, on 4 hooves or weathered boots, when we least expect them. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment to reflect. Perhaps you too are standing guard over something sacred. Perhaps God is preparing a breakthrough in your valley. Keep standing, keep believing. And if you felt the presence of something greater in this journey, let us know in the comments. Just write one word, Amen. Share this story to bless someone who needs hope. Like and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that remind us miracles still ride among us. May God bless you and protect the land and people you love.